Kia ora koutou, my name is David, aka Saint Divide. Welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to conduct a little experiment involving putting a sine wave through a tape emulation plugin, and we're going to see exactly what's happening in terms of the added harmonic distortion so we can get a better idea of how we might use these plugins. I'm going to be working with the Slate Digital Virtual Tapes plugin. So let's not mess around, let's get to it. So here we are in the box, and for this experiment what I've done is lined up a sine wave generator, and I'm going to be doing it at 100 Hertz, so it's going to punch out a sine wave at 100 Hertz. Going into the Slate Digital Virtual Tape machine set on its standard mode, and I'm going to be monitoring the frequency in the Pro Q3. So I'm just going to turn this on. We won't hear any sound because I've muted the channel. So here we go. So in its basic state, you can see I've adjusted the input level to be pinning at 0 on this VU meter here. So we have, clearly 100 Hertz happening here, and it's generating an overtone here at 300 Hertz. 300 Hertz. So straight off the bat, you could start thinking about this in terms of it's going to add a little bit of immediate bump straight after the initial fundamental. So let's start messing around with some of the settings. I'll just leave it in the normal bias. The bias is all about how much current supposedly is being pushed into the tape machine. DC current, direct current, so a high amount or a low amount. And over here we have the different machine types. We've got a 2-inch 16 track. I think it's based on a Studer, and a 1/2-inch 2-track here, which is also based on a Studer machine. Then we have different tape types. This is an FG456, which is a tape apparently from 1975, a really popular style of tape. And then you have the FG9, which is apparently a more modern sounding tape, a thicker layer of oxide. And then you have the different tape speeds, so 30 inches per second or 15 inches per second. So let's, as we can see right now in standard mode, if we were to put this on a drum loop or a bass or whatever, we're not getting any high frequencies, but we are getting just an initial harmonic that in the lower, that's more closely aligned to the fundamental. So if it was a kick drum coming in here, you would get a bit more fattening in the bottom end. So let's just change the machine. Straight away we can see we're getting a little bit more added bump. So, the way I'm thinking about this is how, what sort of sounds would I be using these settings over? And I guess that is the purpose of this walkthrough. What sort of sounds, I'm not going to put this setting on a vocal, for example. Yeah, it's going to thicken up the bottom end. If I've got a really thin vocal, but I want something that's going to add a little bit more harmonic content, harmonic distortion, saturation, if you like, further up in the higher frequencies. So that's that trait. Let's try this different tape. So interestingly enough, we're not really getting much. There's a little bit of a bump, so it's a bit smoother. So maybe I'll go back to this true track. Yeah, so between the two tapes, there's an increased bump in this fundamental or in this harmonic. If we go to the 2-track, with that tape setting, there's not much going on, but with this tape setting, there's more harmonic content being generated. So, just off the bat, this 2-track setting as opposed to the 16-track setting is going to give you more initial harmonic saturation closer to the fundamental. So if we increase the bias, not a huge amount of change on that tape setting at least. Let's try a different tape setting. Quite similar. So this is apparently an increased current. Go to the low setting. So a lower current going into the machines. Not a huge amount of difference between the two, it has to be said. Let's try the different tape type on this 2-track. So more increased presence of those at least. Let's go to the high setting. Yeah, not so much. So a lower bias, Let's change the machine type, lower bias setting, more of a hump right there. Go to this tape setting. Yeah, less action there. So, on all the settings so far, what we've seen in this 30 inches per second mode at least, here's some action. So with a high bias setting, that's more current, 16-inch track, old FG9 tape, which is a more modern tape. Look at the increased harmonic saturation that we're getting from the fundamental here. So, immediately I'm thinking this sort of setting, I'm going to get more saturation in the top end of the sound. So, this would be, something I would consider for vocals and synths and, your overall mix, getting, more saturation into it. If I just change the setting to that tape type, quite interesting, really. There's not a lot going on with that tape type. I'm just going to change the low. Yeah. Change the interesting. So the 2-inch 16 track on the modern style of tape at 30 inches per second on a high bias. That's a setting you might add to vocals, to add a bit of punch and weight to vocals, a bit of sheen, just a bit more saturation. So we'll go back to the normal settings and let's put it on 15 inches per second. So we've got this increased noise down here. I would say that's it's noise. I wouldn't think that that's actually generated saturation. It could be, but obviously there's something happening in there. So let's just go on these settings here, the high bias. Wow. Again, the 2-inch 16 track is generating a lot more saturation, a lot more harmonic content in this area at 15 IPS. So again, this is the sort of thing, you're gonna, if you want to add a bit, there's all this stuff is like around this 3 to 5K region, which would be great on a vocal, to add saturation. Would be great on a mix as well, I would argue. Let's change the machine. So nowhere near as much, just a little bit of added stuff going there, more than there was at the 30 IPS setting. Let's change the tape. So a more modern tape. Go back to this machine. Yeah, a lot more harmonic content. Let's go to the normal setting. Drops away a lot. The low setting, not a huge amount. Change the tape type, the machine. Yeah, so I can see that the highest amount of saturation comes from this machine, the 2-inch 16 track, and high bias mode, and both tapes have a good amount of saturation. Let's just have a look what's going on here. So on the older tape style, notice how these are sort of sitting at these levels here, and when I change to the more modern tape, these are just a little bit more present. So again, this is the sort of thing you would put over a vocal. If I go back into the 30 IPS mode, yeah, we have this presence. It's nowhere near as saturated as the 15 IPS setting. Just change the machine here. Yeah, so this 2-track is going to be a lot smoother in terms of what it's giving. So this machine seems to be putting out a lot more harmonic content than the 1/2-inch 2-track. When saying that, this one has a nice bump. Both tapes, a low setting, and say this one. So this is interesting. So this machine has this 2-inch 16-track machine has all the harmonic saturation across a wider frequency. The 1/2-inch 2-track has more saturation closer to the fundamental. If you're looking at bass and kick drum, which I'm going to do in a minute, then you would possibly use these settings to get a much warmer sound. Using this machine, 15 IPS with a high bias, you're going to drive in a lot more harmonic saturation. So let's have a listen to some drum loops and bass and so on and see if we can notice anything. Okay, so I have a little drum loop here. Here's without any tape on it. So I'm just going to put on the normal setting as it loads, normal bias, 2-inch 16 track, 456 tape, 30 inches per second. So there's quite a difference in the low end, and we saw before that this 30 IPS setting has more harmonic content towards the lower fundamentals. I'm going to switch between the different tape machines and the different tape types, leaving it on 30, and I'll also adjust the bias and I'm going to switch it in and out, and let's just listen to what happens. See if you can pick up on it. So there's definitely a lot more warmth and substance in the lower ends with this 30 IPS setting, and not a lot changes in terms of any high-end content. Even when I go through the different biasing, it's just like different levels of warmth. So let's jump into the 15 IPS. I'll set them back to these again. Remember, the 2x16 track had the highest amount of harmonic saturation above the fundamental. So yep, the same thing. Without it and then with it. There's a big difference with this particular tape on that machine. It really jumps, and we did see that earlier on. You can really hear the high-end saturation starting to kick in now with this 15 IPS setting. With that on, it's actually almost saturating the heck out of it. So you can see what I mean by, this, for me, this plugin has sort of two main uses: bumping the bottom end and keeping it warm and fat in the bottom end, and also creating a bit of sizzle. But it's actually, you've got to dial it back. So I'm going to go on what I think is the most sizzly setting, which is this one, high bias, and I'm going to wind back the input and see if we can just clean up that top end a little bit. certainly adding a lot of color to the sound. Now this is just a drum loop. I'm sure that if you start experimenting with tape plugins and the way I've sort of shown you, and I mean there are other ways of doing it. I know that Paul Third uses a thing called Plugin Doctor and gets a way more definitive analysis of what the plugin is doing. But for me, I just want to see a signal going and I want to see what it's actually doing to the signal. And so even though this is obviously a lot more basic, you can actually visually get an idea of what's going on rather quickly, and now we're sort of hearing it. Let's try a couple of other things. So I've got a pad sound here. Let's just have a listen to it on its own. And it's already got a really nice warm bottom end to it. So, we might want to add a little bit of sizzle. So I'm going to put high bias, 15 IPS, the 2-inch 16 track machine, and we'll just mess around between the different tapes. Let's have a listen without it, and then I'll put it in, take it out, change the tapes, etc. I hope you can hear that added sheen. You've got to be listening on good headphones, and you've got to be now that you sort of know what to expect from this particular tape emulation, you should be able to focus in on the sound. And I'm hearing an increased sheen and warmth and presence to the sound. The thing about pads is they can be really all-consuming in a sound. So if you can add a bit of weight in the top end, or a bit of saturation, a bit of shine in the top end, you can afford to remove a bit of the bottom end. So I'm just going to do that right now by bringing in a high-pass filter. I'll take it out. You can definitely hear that increase in shine. Let's try something else. So I've got this bass loop, just a synth bass loop. Let's have a listen to what it sounds like on its own. Okay, so you can see that it's already got an abundance of high-end saturation. It could probably do with a bit of a boost in the bottom end. So from what we've seen already, I'm just going to leave it on a normal bias. Back to the 30 IPS setting, the 1/2-inch 2-track, because that seemed to have more harmonic content down in the closer to the fundamental, and then this more modern tape setting here. So let's just without it, and I'll kick it in and try a few different settings. Have a listen to what it's doing to the sound. I mean, for me, that's pretty noticeable. Without it. So it's quite obvious to me, at least, that this virtual tape machine is operating in two different ways. It's got settings for more low-end warmth, and it's sort of a bit cleaner, and you can have an aggressive boost as well. And it's also got settings for more shine and more high-end saturation. And for my way of thinking, high bias, 2-inch 16 track machine, 15 IPS, and either of these tapes is going to give you more sheen. You want more bump, low bias, 30 IPS, the 2-track machine, and any of the tapes for more solid low sound. Yeah, so I hope you found that interesting. I certainly did. It's something that I've started to do more and more. I just really want to see what the plugins are doing, because many times you just put them on and we don't really hear what's happening. And I found this approach to be a really useful way of understanding what a plugin is doing in terms of harmonic distortion or however you might want to think about it. Yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Subscribe, whatever. Doesn't matter if you don't want to, it's no drama. Till next time, ka kite anō.